Chapman's Homer, Book 17 of the Iliad, the fight over Patroclus's corpse. A dreadful fight about Patroclus's corse, Euphorbus slain by Menelaus's force, Hector in the armor of Aeacides, Antilochus relating to the decease of slain Patroclus to fair Thetis' son. The body from the striving Trojans won. The Iases, making good the after field, make all the subject that this book doth yield. In row the venturous hosts maintain a slaughterous conflict for the slain. Nor could his slaughter rest concealed from Menelaus's ear, who flew amongst the foremost fights, and with his targe and spear circled the body as much grieved, and with its tender heed to keep it theirs as any dam about her firstborn seed, not proving what the pain of birth would make the love before, nor to pursue his first attaint Euphorbus' spirit forbore, but seeing Menelaus, chief in rescue of the dead, essayed him thus: Atrides, cease and leave the slaughter-ed. With his imbrued spoil to the man that first of all our state and famous succours in fair fight made passage to his fate. And therefore suffer me to wear the good name I have won amongst the Trojans, lest thy life repay what his hath done. O Jupiter, said he, incensed, thou art no honest man. To boast so past thy power to do, not any lion can, nor spotted leopard, nor boar, whose mind is mightiest in pouring fury from his strength, advance so proud a crest as Panthus' fighting progeny, but Hyperenor's pride, that joyed so little time his youth, when he so vilified my force in arms, and called me worst of all our chivalry. Stood my worst, might teach ye all to shun this sequidry. I think he came not safely home to tell his wife his acts, nor less right of thy insolence my equal fate exacts, and will obtain me if thou stay'st. Retire then, take advice. A fool sees naught before 'tis done, and still too late is wise. This moved him not, but to the worse, since it renewed the sting that his slain brother shot in him, remembered by the king, to whom he answered, Thou shalt pay for all the pains endured by that slain brother, all the wounds sustained for him recurred. With one made in thy heart by me, 'tis true thou madst his wife, a heavy widow, when her joys of wedlock scarce had life, and hurtst our parents with his grief, with all which thou gloriest in, for speaking so thy death, and now their grief's end shall begin. To Panthus in the snowy hand of Prontes I will bring those arms, and that proud head of thine, and this laborious thing shall ask no long time to perform, nor be my words alone, but their performance, strength, and fight, and terror thus sets on. This said he struck his all-round shield, nor shrunk that but his lance that turned head in it. Then the king essayed the second chance, first praying to the king of gods, and his dart entry got the force much, driving back his foe in low part of his throat, and ran his neck through. Then fell pride, and he, and all with gore. His locks, that like the graces were, and which he ever wore, in gold, silver ribbons, wrapped, piteously wet. And when alone in some choice place a husbandman hath set the young plant of an olive tree, whose root, being ever fed with plenty of delicious springs, his branches bravely spread, and all his fresh and lovely head grown curled with snowy flowers that dance and flourish with the winds that are the gentlest powers. But when a whirlwind got aloft, stoops with a sudden gale, tears from his head his tender curls, and tosseth therewithal his fixed root from his hollow mines, it well presents the force of Sparta's king, and so the plant Euphorbus and his corse. He slain, the king stripped off his arms, and with their worthy prize, all fearing him had clearly passed, if heaven's fair eye of eyes had not in envy of his acts to this encounter stirred a Mars-like Hector, to whose powers the rescue he preferred of those fair arms, and took the shape of Mentas, colonel of all the Cicones that near the Thracian Hebrus dwell. Like him he thus put forth his voice: Hector, thou scorest the field in headstrong pursuit of those horse that hardly are compelled to take the draught of chariots by any mortal's hand. The great grandchild of Aeacus hath only their command. whom an immortal mother bore. While thou attendst on these, the young Atrides, in defence of Menetiades, hath slain Euphorbus. Thus the god took troop with men again. Hector, hardly perplexed, looked round and saw the slain, still shedding rivers from his wound. And then took envious view of brave Atrides with his spoil, in way to whom he flew, like one of Vulcan's quenchless flames. Atrides heard the cry that ever ushered him, and sighed and said, "O me, if I should leave these goodly arms and him that here lies dead for me, I fear I should offend the Greeks if I should stay and be alone with Hector and his men. I may be compassed in. Some slight or other they may use, many may quickly win their wills of one, and all Troy comes ever where Hector leads. But why, dear mine, dost thou thus talk, when men dare set their heads against the gods, as sure they do that fight with men they love, straight one or other plague ensues? Cannot therefore move the grudge of any Greek that sees I yield to Hector, he still fighting with a spirit from heaven. Yet if I could see brave Ajax, he and I would stand, though against a god, and sure 'tis best I seek him, and then see if we two can procure this course's freedom through all these. A little then let rest the body, and my mind be still, of two bads choose the best." This discourse the troops of Troy ward in with him, and he that made such a lion-like retreat as when the herdsmen see the royal savage and come on, men, dogs, cries, and spears, clear their horned stall, and then the kingly hearts he bears, with all his high disdain falls off. So from the odds of aid, with golden-haired Atrides fled, and his strength displayed upon his left hand, him he wished extremely busied about encouraging his men, to whom an extreme dread Apollo had infused. The king reached just through haste and he straight and glad he went, and was hailing off the body with intent to spoil that he had satisfied admire to the course, hit it with his targe, there setting down as short a foot as in the tender charge of his loved whelps a lion doth 200 hunters near, to give him onset. Their more force makes him the more austere, drowns all their clamours in his roars, darts, dogs, doth all despise, and lets his rough brows down so low they cover all his eyes. So Ajax looked and stood and stayed for great Priamides, when Glaucus Polycides saw Ajax thus depress. Spirit of Hector, thus he chid, "O goodly man at arms, in fight at Paris, why should make fame thee fought gainst our harms, being such a fugitive? Now mark how well thy boasts defend thy city on there with her own. Be sure it all descend that proof holy. Not a man of any Lycian rank shall strike one stroke more for thy own, for no man gets a thank, should he eternally fight here, nor any guard of thee. How wilt thou, worthless? Thou art keeping off an enemy from our poor soldiers, when their prince Sarpedon, guest and friend to thee, and mostly deservedly, thou flewst from in his end, and leftst to all the lust of Greece. O gods, a man that was in life so huge a good to Troy, and to thee such a grace, in death not kept by thee from dogs. If my friends will do well, we'll take our soldiers from your walls, and let all sink to hell, as all will. Well, our faces turned, did such a spirit breathe in all you Trojans. It's become all men that fight beneath their country's standards. You would see that such a prop your cause, with like exposure of their lives, have all the honoured laws of such a dear confederacy kept to them, as now ye might reprise the force in his love, that all of Greece is for himself far best, and leads the best near-fighting men, and therefore would at least redeem Sarpedon's arms, nay, him whom you have likewise lost. This please, his breast bars is a right to us. This looks the darts are now to mix great Hector with his men, and not to blame ye are. Ye choose foes underneath your strength, Ajax exceeds ye far. And answered once, so above me, superior to all Iglebi, Lycia. But now impute. Parent wants that discretion thy words show, to say I lost my ground for Ajax's weakness, nor fear I in command, nor force of chariots, but I fear a power much better than that God holds between our victory and a shield. Yes, lets conquest come and go at his free pleasure, and with fear converts it. Just to these of money that strength of his spirit most. Prince back those that bore the arms, not yet without his sight. For them he changed his own, from where it trained his reindeer down, put on the eternal arms of that celestial states, gave Peleus. Peleus, being old, their use appropriates to his Achilles, that like him forsook them not for age. When he whose empire is in clouds saw Hector went to wage war in divine Achilles' arms, he shook his head and said, poor wretch, thy thoughts are far from death, though he so near hath laid his ambush for thee, that putst on these arms, as braving him whom others fear, hast slain his friend, and from his youthful limb torn rudely off his heavenly arms, himself being gentle, kind, and valiant. Equal measure then thy life and youth must find. Yet since the justice is so strict, that not Andromacha can in thy denied return from fight, must ever take of thee those arms, in glory of thy acts, thou shalt have there that frail blaze of excellence that neighbours death, a strength even to amaze. To his sable brows did bow, and he made fit his limb to those great arms, to fill which the war god entered him, austere, terrible. His joints and every part extends with strength and fortitude, and thus to his admiring friends high clamour brought him. He so shined that all could think no less, but he resembled every way great souled Iacides. Then every way he scoured the field, his captains calling on, Asteropaeus, Eunomos, that foresaw all things done, Glaucus and Medon, Dicenor, and strong Thasilicus, Phorcus and Mesles, Chromius and great Hippothous. To all these and their populous troops, these his excitements were. Hear us, innumerable friends, near bordering nations, hear. We have not called you from our towns to fill our idle eye. With number of so many men, no such vain emprise did ever joy us, but to fight. Trojan wise, with all the children manfully to save the innocent lives, in whose cares we draw all our towns of aiding soldiers dry with gifts, guards, victual, all things fit, and hearten their supply, with all like rights, and therefore now let all sides set this down. Or live or perish, this of war the special secret is, in which most resolute design whoever bears to town, Patroclus laid dead to his hand by winning the renown of Ajax's slaughter, the half spoil we wholly will impart, to his free use, and to ourselves the other half convert. So the glory shall be shared, ourselves with all that have no more than he shall shine in. This drew all to bring abroad their store before the body. Every man had hope it would be his, and forced from Ajax. Silly fools. Ajax prevented this by raising rampires to his friends with half their carcasses, and yet his humour was to roar and fear, and now no less to startle Sparta's king, to whom he cried, "O my friend, O Menelaus, now no hope to get off, here's the end of all our labours, not so much I fear to lose the course, for that's sure gone, the fowls of Troy and dogs will quickly force that piecemeal, as I fear my head and thine, O Atreus' son. Hector, a cloud brings will hide all, instant destruction. Grievous and heavy comes, I call our peers to aid us fly. He hasted and used all his voice, sent far and near his cry. O princes, chief lights of the Greeks, and you that public eye, eat with our general and me, all men of charge, oh no. Jove gives both grace and dignity to any that will show good minds for only good itself, though presently the eye of him that rules discern him not. 'Tis hard for me to spy through all this smoke of burning fight, each captain in his place, and call assistance to our need, be then each other's grace, and freely follow each his next, disdain to let the joy of great Aeacides be forced to feed the beasts of Troy. His voice was first heard and obeyed by swift Iliades. Idomeneus and his mate, renowned Meriones, was seconds to Ilias' son. But the rest, whose mind can lay upon his voice the names that after these combined, on setting up this fight on end, the Trojans first gave on. And as into sea's vast mouth, when mighty rivers run, their billows in the sea resound, and all the utter shore rebellows in her angry shocks the sea's repulsive roar. Such sounds gave the Trojans charge, so was their charge repressed. One mind filled all the Greeks, good brass shields close couched to every breast, and on their bright helms Jove poured down a mighty deal of night, to hide Patroclus, whom alive, and when he was the knight of that grandchild of Aeacus, Saturnius did not hate, nor dead would see him dealt to gods, and so did instigate his fellows to his worthy guard. At first the Trojans drave the black-eyed Grecians from the course, but not a blow they gave that came at death. While they hung about the body's heels, the Greeks quite gone, but all that while did Ajax whet the steels of all his forces that could back way to the course again. Brave Ajax, that for form and fact past all that did maintain the Grecian flame next Thetis' son, now flew before the first. And as a sort of dogs and youths are by a boar dispersed about a mountain, so fled these from mighty Ajax all, that stood in conflict for the course, who thought no chance could fall betwixt them and the prize at Troy. For both Hippothous, Lethus' Pelagus' famous son, was so adventurous that he would stand bore the course about the ankle bone, where all the nervy fibres meet and ligaments in one, to make that motion of those parts through which he did convey the thong and baldric of his shield. So was drawing away all thanks from Hector and his friends, but in their stead he drew an ill that no man could avert, for Telamonius threw a lance that struck quite through his helm. His brain came leaping out, down fell Aeacides, and with him the body's hoisted foot. Far from Larissa's soil he fell, a little time allowed to his industrious spirits to quit the benefits bestowed by his kind patience. But his wreck Priamides essayed, and threw at Ajax, but his dart discovered. Instead, Schedius, son of Iphitus, of all the same hand giving way apple soul that was the spring of fiercer seed. The javelin struck skirts through and tore the bowels from the belly's mist. His fall made those before, gave back a little Hector's self, and forced that turn to face. And then the Greeks bestowed their shouts, took vantage of the chase, drew off, and spoiled Hippothus, and focused their arms, and then ascended. Ilion had shaken with alarms, discovering the impotence of Troy even past the will of Jove. By the proper force of Greece had Phoebus failed to move. Aeneas, in similitude, like Anfarsia god to Venus's tears, asked him how he would maintain this keep on the height in spite of gods presumed when men approved so select. For all that puffed him with their pride, but in their proper strengths, and generally supplied with such unfrighted multitudes, but he well knew that Jove, besides their self-conceits, sustained their forces with more love than theirs of Greece, and yet all that lacked power to hearten them. Aeneas threw the god and knew the god, then said, "It was a shame extreme that those of Greece should beat them so, and by their cowardice, not want of man's aid nor the gods, and this before his eyes, a deity stood even. Now, and vouched affirming Jove their aid, and so bade Hector and the rest, to whom all this he said, turn head and not at quick ease. Before and all Pisaon struck so sore that straight he strode the dusty center, and it did stick in that congealed at first, who was en route the like for breath. Made of Grecian bind about the bloody slain, amongst whom Ajax bears the greatest labour, every way exhorting to abide, and no man fly the course afoot, nor break their ranks in pride. Of any foremost daring spirit, but each foot hold his stand, and use the closest fight they could, and this was the command of mighty Ajax, which observed they steeped the earth in blood. The Trojans and their friends fell thick, nor all the Grecians stood, though the fewer suffered fate, for ever they had care to shun confusion, the toil that still oppresseth there. So set they all the field on fire, with which you would have thought the sun and moon had been put out, in such a smoke they fought about the person of the prince. But all the field beside fought underneath the lightsome heaven. The sun was in his pride, and such expansion of his beams he thrust out of his throne, that not a vapour durst appear in all that region. No, not upon the highest hill. There fought they still, and breathed, shunned danger, cast their darts aloof, and not a sword unsheathed. The other plied it, and the war and night plied them as well. The cruel steel afflicting all, the strongest did not dwell, unhurt within their iron roots. Two men of special name, Antilochus and Thrasimede, who are yet unserved by fame. Notice of Patroclus' death, they thought him still alive in foremost tumult, and might well, foreseeing their fellows thrive in no more comfortable sort than fight in death would yield. They fought apart, for so their sire old Nestor strictly willed, and joining fight more from the fleet. War here increased his heat. The whole day long continually the labour and the sweat, the knees, calves, feet, hands, faces smeared of men that Mars applied. And the good Achilles' friend, and as a huge ox hide, courier gives amongst the men to supple and extend with oil till it be drunk withal. They tug, stretch out, and spend their oil and liquor liberally, and chafe the leather so that out they make a vapour breathe, and in their oil doth go. A number of them set on work, and in an orb they pull, that always all parts of the hide they may extend at full. So here and there did both parts hail the course in little place, and wrought it always with their sweat. The Trojans hoped for grace, to make it reach to Ilion, the Grecians to their fleet. A cruel tumult they stirred up, and such as shud Mars' seat. That horrid hurrier of men, or she that betters him, Minerva, never so incensed, they could not disesteem. So baneful a contention did Jove that day extend of men and horse about the slain, of whom his godlike friend had no instruction. So far off and underneath the wall of Troy that conflict was maintained, which was not taught at all by great Achilles, since he charged that having set his foot upon the ports he would retire, well knowing Troy no boot for his assaults without himself, since not by him as well he knew it was to be subdued. His mother oft would tell the mind of mighty Jove therein, oft hearing it in heaven, but of that great ill to his friend was no instruction given by careful Thetis. By degrees must ill events be known. The foes cleft one to other still, but the overthrown. His death with death infected both. Even private Greeks would say either to other, 'Twere a shame for us to go our way, and let the Trojans bear to Troy the praise of such a prize, which let the black earth gasp and drink our blood for sacrifice before we suffer. 'Tis an act much less unfortunate than would those of Troy resolve. For certainly our fate will fell us altogether here. Of all not to turn a face, this either side his fellow's strength excited past his place, and thus through all the unfruitful air an iron sound ascended up to the golden firmament, when strange effects contended in these immortal heaven-bred horse of great Iacides, whom once removed from forth the fight, a sudden sense did seize of good Patroclus' death, whose hands they oft had undergone, and bitterly they wept for him. Nor could Automedon with any manage make them stir, oft use the scourge to them, oft use his fairest speech, as oft threats never so extreme. They neither to the Hellespont would bear him nor the fight, but still as any tombstone lays his never stirred weight on some good man or woman's grave for rites of funeral, so unremoved stood these steeds, their heads to earth let fall, and warm tears gushing from their eyes with passionate desire. Their kind manager, their manes that flourished with the fire of endless youth, allotted them, fell through the yoky sphere, ruthfully ruffled and defiled. Jove saw their heavy cheer, and pitying them, spake to his mind. Poor wretched beasts, said he, why gave we you to mortal king, when immortality and incapacity of age so dignifies your states? Was it to haste the miseries poured out on human fates? Of all the miserablest things that breathe and creep on earth, no one more wretched is than man. And for your deathless birth, Hector must fail to make you prize. It's not enough he wears and glories vainly in those arms. Your chariots and rich gears beside you are too much for him. Your knees and spirits again, my care of you shall fill with strength, that so ye may sustain Automedon, and bear him off to Troy. I still will give the grace of slaughter till at fleet their bloody feet arrive, till Phoebus drink the western sea, and sacred darkness throws her sable mantle twixt their points. Thus in the steeds he blows excessive spirit, and through the Greeks and Ilians they rapt, the whirling chariot shaking off the crumbled centre wrapped amongst the tresses. With them Automedon did let fly amongst the Trojans, making away through all his frightfully, as though jangling flock of geese, a lordly vulture beats, given way with shrike axe by every goose that comes but near his threats. With such state fled he through the press, pursuing as he fled, but made no slaughter, nor he could, alone being carried upon the sacred chariot. Well, how could he both works do? Direct his javelin and commands his fiery horses too. At length he came where he beheld his friend Alcimedon. It was the good Laerces, the son of Aemon's son, whose close came to his chariot's side and asked, "What god is he that hath so robbed thee of their soul? To run this frantically amongst these forfights, being alone thy fighter, being slain, and Hector glorying in his arms." He gave these words again, "Alcimedon, what man is he of all that Argive race, so able as thyself to keep in use of press and pace these deathless horse? Himself being gone, that like the gods had thought of their high manage. Therefore take to thy command his part, and ease me of the double charge which thou hast blamed with right." He took the scourge and reins in hand, Automedon the fight, which Hector seeing instantly, Aeneas standing near, he told him he discerned the horse that mere immortal were, addressed to fight with cowards' guides, as therefore hoped to make a rich prize of them, if his mind would help to undertake. For those two could not stand the charge. He granted, and both cast dry solid hides upon their necks, exceeding soundly brast, and forth they went, associated with two more godlike men, Aratus and bold Chromius. Nor made they question then to prize the goodly crested horse, and safely sound to hell the souls of both their guardians. O fools, they could not tell, they could not work out their return from fierce Automaton without the liberal cost of blood, who first made orison to Father Jove, and then was filled with fortitude and strength, and counselling Alcimedon to keep at no great length the horse from him, but let them breathe upon his back, because he sought the advance that Hector made, whose fury had no laws. Proposed to it, but both their lives and those horse made his prize, or his life theirs. He called to friend these well-approved supplies, the Iases and the Spartan king, and said, "Come, princes, leave a sure guard with the course, and then to your kind care receive our threatened safeties. I discern the two chief props of Troy prepared against us, but herein what best man can enjoy lies in the free knees of the gods. My dart shall lead ye all, the sequel of the care of Jove I leave, whatever for." All this spake good Automedon. Then brandishing his lance, he threw and struck a Treatus' shield that gave his entrance through all the steel, and by his belt, his belly's inmost part, it pierced, and all his trembling limbs gave life up to his dart. Then Hector at Automedon blazing lance let fly, whose flight he saw, and falling flat, the compass was too high, and made it stick beyond in earth. The extreme part burst, and there Mars buried all his violence. The sword then for the spear changed the conflict. Had not haste sent both the Iases in, both serving close their fellows' call, who, where they did begin, there drew the end. Priamides, Aeneas, Chromius, and out of what such aid and work, left broken-hearted thus, Aratus to Automedon, who spoiled his arms and said, "A little this revives my life for him so lately dead, though by his nothing countervailed, and with this little vent of inward grief he tucked the spoil, with which he made ascent, up to his chariot hands and feet of bloody strain so full, that lion-like he looked new turned from tearing up a bull. And now another bitter fight about Patroclus grew, tear-thirsty, and of toil enough, which Pallas did renew. Descending from the cope of stars, dismissed by sharp-eyed Jove, to animate the Greeks, for now in constant change did move his mind from what he held of late. And as the purple bow Jove bends at mortals, when of war he will the signal show, or make it a presage of cold in such tempestuous sort, that men are of their pleased labouring cattle hurt. So Pallas did in a purple cloud involve herself, and went amongst the Grecians, stirred up all, but first encouragement she breathed in Atreus' younger son, and for the skies made choice of aged Phoenix's shape, and spake with his unwearied voice, so Menelaus, much defame and equal heaviness, will touch at thee if this true friend of great Diacides' dogs tear beneath the Trojan walls. And therefore bear thee well, toil through the host, and every man with all thy spirit impel. He answered, O thou long since born, O Phoenix, that hast won the honour, foster father's name of Thetis' godlike son, I would Minerva would but give strength to me, but keep these busy darts off. I would then make indeed and steep my income in their bloods. In aid of good Patroclus much, his death afflicts me much. But yet this Hector's grace is such, that with Jove, such a fiery strength and spirit he has, that still his kneeling, still is killing still. The king's so royal will, Minerva's joy to hear, since she did all the gods outgo in this remembrance, for which grace she kindly did bestow strength on his shoulders, and did fill his knees as liberally with swiftness, breathing in his breast the courage of a fly, which loves to bite so, and doth bear man's blood so much good will, that still, though beaten from a man, she flies upon him still. With such a courage Pallas filled the black parts near his heart, and then he hasted to the slain, cast off a shining dart, took one Podes that was heir to Iliad, rich man and strenuous, and by the people done much honour, and by Hector too, being consort and his guest, and him the yellow-headed king laid hold on at his waist, and offering flight, his iron pile struck through him, down he fell, and up Atrides drew his course, then Phoebus did impel. Spirit of Hector, Phoenips, like surname Desiades, whom Hector used of all his guests the greatest friendliness, and in Abydos stood his house, in whose from thus he spake, Hector, what a man of all Greeks will any terror make, meeting thy strength any more, when thou art terrified by Menelaus, who before he slew thy friend was tired, a passing easy soldier. When now besides his end imposed by him, he draws him off, and not a man to friend from all the Trojans. This friend is Podes, Eetion's son. Well, this hid him in a cloud of grief, and set him foremost on. And then Jove took his snake-fringed shield, and Ida covered all with sulphury clouds, from whence he let abhorred lightnings fall, and thundered till the mountains shook. And with his dreadful state he ushered victory to Troy, to Argos flight and fate. Peneleus, Boetius was he that foremost fled, being wounded in his shoulder's height, but there the lance's head struck lightly, glancing to his mouth because it struck him near. Thrown from Polydamas, Laertes next left the fight in fear, being heard by Hector in his hand, because he doubted sore his hand in wished fight with Troy would hold his lance no more. Idomeneus sent a dart at Hector, rushing in and following Laertes. It struck his bosom near his chin, and brake at top. The Ilians for his escape did shout, when Hector at Deucalides another lance sent out. In his chariot he stood, missed him narrowly, for as it fell, Tyrannus drave his speedy chariot by, and took the Trojan lance himself. He was the charioteer of stern Meriones, and first on foot did service there, which well he left to govern horse, for saving now his king, with driving twixt him and his death, though thence his own did spring, which kept a mighty victory from Troy, in keeping death from his great sovereign. The fierce dart did enter him beneath his ear, betwixt his jaw, and it drove down, cut through his tongue, and struck his teeth out. From his hands the horse's reins he flung, which now Meriones received as they bestrode the field, and bade his sovereign scourge away. He saw that day would yield no hope of victory for them. He feared the same and fled, nor from the mighty-minded son of Telamon lay hid Northern king. They saw him. What fool is he that sees not Jove's hand in this grace and outdone our enemy, nor any darts they touch but takes from whomsoever thrown, valiant, coward. What he wants, Jove adds, not anyone. Wants his direction to strike sure, not ours to miss as sure. Come, let us be sure of this, to put the best in yore that lies in us. Which twofold is both to fetch off our friend, and so to fetch him off as we may likeliest contend, to fetch ourselves off, that our friends surviving may have right, in joy of our secure retreat, as he that fell in fight, being kept as sure from further wrong, with which perhaps they doubt, and looking this way grieve for us, not able to work out our pass from this manslaughter. Great Hector and his hands that are too hot for men to touch, but that these thirsty sands before our feet will be enforced to drink our headlong death, which to prevent by all means fit I would the parted breathe of good Patroclus, to his friend with speed imparted war, by some he loves, for I believe no heavy messenger hath yet informed him. But alas, I see no man to send, both men and horse are hid in mists. Every way descend, O Father Jupiter. Do thou the sons of Greece release of this fell darkness, grace this day with fit transparencies. Give the eyes thou givest, their use destroy us in the light, and work thy will with us, since needs thou wilt against us fight. This spake he weeping, and his tears Saturnius pity showed, dispersed the darkness instantly, drew away the cloud from whence it fell. The sun shined out, and all the host appeared, and then spake Ajax, whose heard prayer his spirits highly cheered. Brave Menelaus, look about, and if thou canst descry Nestor's Antilochus alive, and cite him instantly to tell Achilles that his friend, most dear to him, is dead. He said, nor Menelaus stuck at anything he said, as loth to do it, but he went. As from a grazier's stall a lion goes when overlaid with men, dogs, darts, and all, not easily losing a fat ox, but strong watch all night held. His teeth yet watering oft he comes, and is as oft repelled. The adverse darts so thick are poured before his brown hid eyes, and burning firebrands, which for all his great heart's heat he flies, and tumbling goes his betimes. So from Patroclus went Atrides, much against his mind, his doubt being vehement, lest he gone from his guard, the rest would leave for very fear, the person to the spoil of Greece, and yet his guardians were the Iaces and Meriones, whom much his care did press, and thus exhort, Iaces, and both you, Meriones, now let some true friend call to mind the gentle and sweet nature of poor Patroclus. Let him think how kind to every creature his heart was living, though now dead. Thus urged the fair-haired king, and parted, casting round his eye, as when upon her wing an eagle is, whom men affirm to have the sharpest sight of all air's region of fowls, and though of mighty height, sees yet within her levy form of humble shrubs close laid, a light foot hare, which straight she stoops, trusses, and strikes her dead. So dead thou struck'st thy charge, O king, through all the war's thicket so. Thou luck'st and swiftly found'st thy man exhorting against the foe, and heartening his plied men to blows used in the war's left wing, to whom thou saidst, thou god-loved man, come here and hear a thing, of which I wish I never were to hear, I think even thy eyes sees. What a destruction God hath laid upon the sons of Greece. What a conquest he gives Troy, in which the best of men, Patroclus, lies exanimate, whose person passing fain the Greeks would rescue and bear home, and therefore give thy speed to his great friend, to prove if he will do so good a deed, to fetch the naked person off, for Hector's shoulders wear his prized arms. Antilochus was highly grieved to hear this heavy news, and stood, surprised, with stupid silence long, his fair eyes standing full of tears, his voice so sweet and strong. Stuck in his bosom, yet all is wrought, in him no neglect of what Atrides gave in charge, but for that quick effect he gave Laodocus his arms, his friend that he had guide, of swift his horse. And then his knees were speedily applied in his sad message, which his eyes told all the way in tears. Nor would their generous heart assist his sore charged soldiers. O Menelaus, in meantime thou left in much distress, thou seent'st them godlike Thrasimede, and madst thy kind regress back to Patroclus, where arrived half breathless thou didst say to both the Iases, I have sent this messenger away to swift Achilles, who I fear will hardly help us now, though mad with Hector, without arms he cannot fight, ye know. Let us then think of some best mean, both how we may remove the body and get ourselves from this vociferous drove and fate of Trojans. Bravely spoke at all parts, Ajax said, O glorious son of Atreus, thou take then straight the dead, and thou, Meriones, we two of one mind as one name, will back ye soundly and on us receive the wild fire flame that Hector rage breathes after you, and before it come at you. This said, they took into their arms the body, all the show that might be made to those of Troy at arms bearing it. Out shrieked the Trojans when they saw the body borne to fleet, and rushed on, as at any boar gashed with the hunter's wounds, a kennel of the sharpest set and sorest bitten hounds, before their youthful huntsmen's haste, and eagerly awhile pursue, as if they were assured of their affected spoil. But when the savage in his strength, as confident as they, turns head amongst them, back they fly, and every one his way. So troop meal Troy pursued a while, laying on with swords and darts. But when the Iases turned on them, and made their stand, their hearts drunk from their faces all their bloods, and not a man sustained the forechance nor the after fight. And thus Greece nobly gained the person towards home, but thus the changing war was racked out to a passing bloody length, as for once put in a pact of fire, invading city roofs, is suddenly engrossed, made a wondrous mighty flame, in which is quickly lost a house long building. All the while a boisterous gust of wind lumbering amongst it, so the Greeks, in bearing of their friend, more and more foes drew at their heels, a tumult thundering still, of horse and foot. Yet as when mules hailing from a hill a beam or mast, through foul deep way, well clapped and hardened close, lie to their labor, tug and sweat, and passing hard it goes. Urged by their drivers to all haste, so dragged they on the course. Still both the Iases at their backs, who back still turned the force, though after it grew still the more, yet as a sylvan hill thrusts back a torrent that hath kept a narrow channel still, till at his oaken breast it beats, but there a check it takes, that sends it over all the vale and all the stir it makes, nor can with all the confluence break through his rooty sides. In no less firm and brave repulse the Iases curb the prides of all the Trojans. Yet all held the pursuit in his strength, their chiefs being Hector and the son of Venus, who at length put all the youth of Greece besides in most amazeful rout, forgetting all their fortitudes, distraught and shrieking out, a number of their rich arms lost, fallen from them here and there, about and in the dike, and yet the war concludes not here.